Morning, patchy fog, mostly cloudy skies with a high of 54. Tuesday, mostly sunny with a high of 59. Wednesday, mostly sunny and 61. Thursday, partly sunny and 59. Friday, mostly cloudy and 56. And next Saturday, a small chance of showers, partial sunshine with a high of 58.
It's the worldwide sound of OM Radio.
Welcome to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.
Did the cat in the Bridgeport, Connecticut poltergeist case of 1974 actually have a conversation with a police officer? Would the discovery that Jesus Christ had bloodline descendants really make any difference to anyone? What's with all the new UFO revelations from the U.S. military?
Hello, and welcome to the 993rd edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno, coming to you from WOON, AM and FM radio here in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, on the Paranormal Radio app from TalkStream Live, on YouTube, and via TuneIn.com. I'm Ben, and that was Paul. And today we bring you an open line show with a sort of new, sort of mind-wrenching scientific ideas. And we'll hop right into it. You can give us a call. That's 401-766-1240. That's from anywhere. Or you can email Paul at behindtheparanormal.com.
No, I should mention that email is half working. Apparently we can receive, but we cannot send. The tech gurus are working on that. But, go ahead and send.
And also, when in doubt, you could always reach out to us via Facebook as well.
Of course. Now, I want to give a bit of a shout out to my son and daughter-in-law here. It is their 7th wedding anniversary today.
Oh, yes.
And we thank you and my lovely daughter-in-law for spending a little time with us anyway.
Oh, yeah, no worries. It's
Okay.
it's funny because on this day, 7 years ago, it was also raining a little bit. If I recall correctly, but it ended up being a really nice day. But
it was the most beautiful wedding I ever attended.
Yeah,
Maybe I'm a little biased.
No, I mean, people keep telling me it was the best wedding they've ever been to, and we did set the bar very high.
Well, your mother and I had a nice wedding. As a matter of fact, anybody who's left alive says it was a very fun wedding.
I know it sounded like a real hootenanny.
Yeah, something like that. Anyway. We'll start with some questions from YouTube, which we tend to neglect our channel. But I love these names. Ted Feo 1. No idea who that is or where he's from, but right at the top of the lineup, Ben.
Sure thing. And we'll start with this. So I grew up in Bridgeport and remember walking by that house. I would love to talk to the police officer who supposedly looked down as the cat asked him, "How is your brother?" He supposedly responded, "He is dead," and the cat ran off swearing.
All right, now that's not something you hear every day. The background here, that's the increasingly famous, I guess, Bridgeport, Connecticut poltergeist case of 1974. I happened to blunder into it because I was on my way to dinner at Ed and Lorraine Warren's house, the couple that's famous from the Conjuring films. And the case broke while I was just arriving, about 10 miles away in Bridgeport. There were lots of, it's considered one of the best documented poltergeist cases in history because the place was crawling with first responders, journalists, and a whole bunch of other people. So that was the background. One of the sideshows was that, and it was a real case. I saw this stuff myself. As a matter of fact, I'm the only major witness left, except for Officer Joe Tomac, whom you may hear on the show at some point, who was a retired police officer who saw a lot of stuff himself. But in any case, the sideshow was the cat Sam, who was the pet of the little girl Marcy, who seemed to be at the center of the case. And Sam supposedly could talk. Now, I wasn't born yesterday, and I never heard the cat talk, except I thought Marcy was throwing her voice. But what kind of gets me about that police officer story is that Sam was an indoor cat, wouldn't have been outside. Now maybe it was the cat next door, whom I met in the course of this and was kind of strange. But Sam supposedly could speak, and the man who was the head of the family there was Gerard Gooden, Marcy's adopted dad, had said that the cat would come to the top of the steps, bang on the door, and demand to be let out. And this is a no-nonsense guy. So I really don't know, but I remember especially having become a journalist later on, standing there and watching network reporters from CBS, ABC, and NBC, which at the time were the only games in town, standing around Sam, holding mics to him, asking him to speak. I'll never forget that sight. Anyway.
Yeah, not much changes, huh?
No. Anyway, thank you for the question, but I think that it's, I kind of reserve judgment on that, and I take it with a pillar of salt.
Now, we have another question. This is from Tammy, sort of along the same lines, re the Bridgeport case. Paul, you said these entities had physical structure, almost bird-like, if I remember correctly. Can you elaborate further?
All right, if I can. Yeah, the Monday night of the case, we had arrived on Sunday, and we were there for the better part of 3 days because the place is pretty much a circus. Things were moving around. I saw a refrigerator float. I was hit by a flying television set, and a number of other things happened. But in the case of the Monday night, I call it an attack, because it really was, by 4 what today we call parasites. We were assuming these were demons at that time. I was a student for the priesthood, and the Warrens were very, very quote-unquote theological. So, and we had a priest with us, Father Bill Charbonneau. And this was, this occurred when I was alone, not alone, but I was the only investigator in the house at the time. The Warrens had gone off to do a television interview. I was there with the family, and these things came out of Marcy's room into the kitchen. You could see like a cloud. And in our recent lecture program having to do with time storms, these clouds do form in the way we would put it, where there are intersect points with parallel worlds. Anyway, 4 of these things, you could see these kind of, I call them gauzy, they were kind of off-white things coming down the hallway, and one of them came up to me. I put Marcy behind me because I knew it was after her, and just instinctively, I pushed against it. It pushed back, which really threw me for a loop because these things are supposed to be spirits. Demons, by definition, in the classic sense, are spirits, therefore no bodies. Well, this thing certainly had a body. I could feel a skeletal structure that was almost bird-like to me. I didn't do that well in biology class, but I know what a bird looks like. And very strange. He got around me, threw Marcy across the room, and at that point I pulled everybody out of the house. Fortunately, the police had cordoned off Lindley Street, at least that block of it, and we didn't walk out in the middle of a crowd. So that's the story of that. On another occasion, this is a few years later, I had a similar physical confrontation with a poltergeist that felt the same way. And the funny thing is Then in doing research in ensuing years, I found out that many of the ancients, particularly the Babylonians and the Sumerians, interpreted demons as being bird-like. I'm not entirely sure why, but maybe that's it. Maybe they had similar encounters. So that's about all I can say about it. But the reason I think it was very physical was because these things are not spirits in any classical sense of the word. They are perfectly living beings, part of nature that we don't know about yet officially, and they live in parallel worlds as outlined in quantum mechanics, sort of fringe area of theoretical physics. And physicists today believe in parallel worlds, usually in one form or another, because you can't get around it. You can't get around the math. You can't get around the experiments and the facts. So whatever these things are, we believe there are about 9 different species of parasites, and some of the ones at the lower end could bond with people for reasons that we don't have time to discuss. And there you have it. I think that's why they're perfectly physical, whether you can see them or not. And the analogy I always use is if you're working on a computer and you want to open a picture, say in Photoshop or whatever app you use, it might say open a JPEG, okay? But if there are TIFFs and PNGs in there, you won't see them. They're there, but they're not there on that list because you're tuned in just to the JPEGs. Anybody who's into computers might realize, and that's almost everybody today, might use that as a kind of way to understand why you wouldn't see them, but they're there physically.
Interesting.
So I don't know, Ben, if you had any comment. I mean, you weren't there.
No.
You weren't even in my imagination at the time.
Or was I there?
Well, let's see, it was 18 years before you were born, but you were around.
Really?
Parallel realities.
Was it only 18 years? Oh, yeah.
1970, yeah.
Oh, okay. I guess so, huh? Yeah. Well, geez. For some reason, it feels like it's longer ago than that.
You did better in math than I did.
Well, no, not really. I use calculators, and so I'm not that much better.
So
But-
yeah, that's the story of that. If Ben has a comment.
No, it's interesting because it's like, I don't know. It was such a landmark case, I suppose, and now it's sort of getting notoriety.
Yeah, it was forgotten for 40 years, and then Bill Hall, who's been on this show several times, wrote a book called The World's Most Haunted House, and which really took the whole thing by storm. And I think he did a good job. And but most of the other witnesses are dead.
Well, I mean, up until like a decade ago, really the only thing that the Warrens were kind of known for at the time was the Amityville Horror, right?
Yeah,
and
then the Conjuring.
And then The Conjuring came out, and now it's like there's more and more stuff kind of coming to the surface. And it's like, it's not like it wasn't there, people didn't know about it. Now it's just more popularized, because now I'll if somebody even is vaguely aware of the paranormal in some sense, I'll say, oh yeah, Bridgeport, and people are like, oh yeah. Like I was at a wedding 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I got talking with some of the people at our table, and I don't know how it came up, but somehow I think Marion brought it up actually, and everyone, because it's like a fun party. Oh, Ben hunts ghosts, and it's like, and so it's like oh, that's kind of cool. And then I'm like, yeah, I'll kind of explain a little bit of the history that you worked with Ed and Lorraine Warren, blah 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 blah. And they were like, oh, was he there for Amityville? And I was like, no, he
almost.
I was like almost, but he was there for the Bridgeport case, and he worked with them on a couple other things, and they were like, Bridgeport case, like we know that one. And I was like, oh, that's a surprise. So I think as time is going on, it's becoming more and more popularized, and I think Bill actually probably had a lot to do with that, because prior to his book, it was like one in the archives somewhere, hidden away. But now it's kind of like it's getting more and more notoriety as time is going on. So I think it's a landmark for a lot of different reasons. And so I think that probably is one of the more interesting points, is just how we interact with the phenomena. And even
Well, you've
even
run
this-
into parasites in your time.
I mean, I have, yeah,
Yeah.
but never had like never had a
And
shoving
nothing
match
quite
with
so
them.
dramatic.
No. It wasn't as dramatic, and I kind of just was like whatever about them. It's like
Yeah.
you're not as scary as you like to think you are. It's like I know what you're trying to do here, and it's you. That's really about it.
I remember the haunted policeman in Vermont, one of your two first cases,
Baby's first case.
and you took the picture where that parasite appeared right in the back of the guy,
Oh yeah.
that dark mass figure, and I didn't want to show it to you. I was afraid, but you took it in stride. You were a natural.
I was very much enamored by Lord of the Rings at the time.
Yeah, it looked like a
so-
Black Rider of Lord of the Rings. Anyway, so that's about. There'll be more coming down the Hollywood pike about that case, but we can't talk much about that. But thank you for the question, the two questions
Yes.
on that case.
And we
which is-
shall move on to the next one. And now for something completely different. So this is from Sam.
not the cat.
No, not Sam the cat. This
Good.
is from Sam, who writes, I saw a light being bending over me in the middle of the night as it aroused me from sleep by calling my name. Its voice sounded like, it was speaking through water. This being was over 6 feet tall and ended up collapsing into an orb. Then it shot through the ceiling, making a popping sound as it went.
Now that's interesting. That's kind of a combination of a number of different phenomena that one hears about. The orbs, for one thing, these kind of balls of light that really started to show up in photography when digital media came along. Now, in days of yore, we would use cameras with film and all that, and you get sort of they almost look like bursts of light, almost like reflections, but you could tell they weren't. So maybe those were early orbs, but with digital media, such as your smartphone or a digital camera, you can get these orbs, and sometimes you see them with the naked eye. I've seen many with the naked eye. One thinks of ball lightning, which is a known phenomenon. But orbs are often interpreted by many people as, quote, spirit orbs, and they assume that they're ghosts or something of that kind. Our interpretation varies from case to case, but very often we've found those to be living things that feed around the boundaries of parallel worlds, feeding on energy. We have a number of reasons for believing that, but they're very present in many of these flap areas and other cases. As far as light beings are concerned, this is a common happening.
I do think the popping sound is very interesting, because
Yes.
that almost sounds like ball lightning.
It does, yeah.
Which makes it even more fascinating. It's interesting because the way it's described is what's really kind of getting me. Like the voice sound like you're someone speaking through water.
Yeah.
And then making, I don't know, it's the audio stuff that's really very interesting to me.
What does it sound like when somebody speaks through water?
A little bit of onomatopoeia there.
Yeah.
I guess, I don't know. I guess kind of sounding muddy almost,
Okay.
perhaps.
Yeah.
Like kind of like you're like, that's what I would guess.
Yeah.
Sounding
I guess.
very, very, very muddy, distant.
Yeah.
Maybe not so much distorted. Distorted kind of sounds more digital. Yeah, I would be curious as to what it sounds like.
Well, I'm also interested in the fact that so many of these things happen on the cusp of sleep, hypnagogic state, that sort of thing. That doesn't mean they're not legitimate. We do tend to be more aware in a multiversal sense.
Oh yeah.
I've been on the cusp of sleep and have dogs barking in my ears and stuff like that. But all of us have things like that to some extent. Or I'll hear, your mom or something who isn't necessarily pleased with something,
Oh yeah.
and she hasn't said a thing. So that sort of thing is, or maybe I'm just a fruitcake, I don't know. But no, people often say they have things in that state of awareness. But light beings, any kind of being, we always send up the red flag. Don't trust them. At the risk of sounding like Bill Murray in Ghostbusters 2. That's a problem with aliens. You just can't trust them. But
It's not wrong.
no. It's a matter of being very careful about that. On the other hand, you've seen many cases of healings that have taken place. Kathy Martin could tell us about some of those, where people have just come along and had serious illnesses. Orbs have shown up and kind of gone inside them and fixed it. And that's interpreted as alien intervention or something like that. On the other hand, there are cases where orbs have shown up, gone through people, and they end up with cancer or something like that. So you just don't know. But if these things happen to you, you don't look for them. I mean, it is what it is. You have to interpret it as best you can.
Yeah.
Just be cautious. And I would ask the questioner if any further events have taken place of that nature.
Yeah, I'd be curious too.
Yeah, so maybe write in again. But thank you for that.
And now it is time for our Colombian connection.
Oh, yes.
Which is Peter Shelley.
Yes.
I've been trying so hard to come up with a fun alliteration, and so there it is, our Colombian connection.
I like that.
And Peter writes to us, what has happened to alien abduction cases? They seem to have disappeared, or are you hearing about recent ones?
Oh, yeah. Well, being a member of the Experiencer Resource Team of MUFON, we meet monthly and we communicate regularly. And I have heard of a number of cases recently. The thing is, abduction cases are becoming systematized. A lot of people are studying them, mining the data that may be obtainable from them, counseling or otherwise talking to the people who have experienced them, and following the cases. You may mean, Peter, that the nature of abductions has maybe changed from medical procedures to other things. I'm thinking of the lady we had on, got to be a few months ago now, it was last year actually, who had actually claimed that she crews as a CREWS UFO craft and has attended educational functions run by aliens for people of all sorts of different species. So, I mean, you can take that for what it's worth, which is maybe a lot. I don't know. I mean, it happened to her. And the President Dennett, who was a respected UFO researcher, wrote a book about this case, and he claims, and we trust him, that a demonstration was mounted by a craft so that he would would know that this was real. So again, take it for what it's worth, and who knows? But abduction cases apparently are still taking place, probably in numbers that are so great people would be very surprised. This raises questions in my mind about who's doing this, why, and how long has this been going on. There's every indication it's been going on pretty much forever, which raises the question of what are we doing here? What are we for? What is the nature of God? are we meant as an experiment, this kind of thing. So really, who knows? I mean, but present in most of our religions, including Christianity, is the idea of a war between good and evil. This goes back to many legends of wars among the gods or wars among alien races, in which we were kind of caught in the middle. So again, who knows? I sat down with your mom last evening, Ben, and she's taken to watching Ancient Aliens, which I find rather disconcerting. In almost 43 years of marriage, she's never been too interested in this, and it's kind of tried to keep my feet on the ground. On the other hand, I'm kind of amazed at her interest in it, but there is one thing that they patently fail to appreciate on that show, and I respect the people on the show. Most of them are friends of ours, the ones who were interviewed, and including Reverend Michael Carter was on a few weeks ago. And they fail to appreciate other possibilities than Ancient Aliens. They fail to appreciate, I think, something that Stanton Friedman, the grandfather of modern UFO studies, believed in, at least he told us that he did. The cyclical theory of history. Again, apologies for my voice. I sound like Don Corleone here with the vocal cord condition I have. However, he would say that we have not had a linear history where you go from caves to condos in a straight line over all that time.
Right.
We have 1 million years, at least, of empty history we know nothing about. Many indigenous peoples, including the Aborigines of Australia, and I heard it right from the horse's mouth down there in 1979, and other indigenous peoples, particularly the Hopi of the American Southwest, believe in a cyclical theory that we have been, as it were, from stone tools to power tools, maybe 4 times in all that long history, most of which we know nothing about. So there could be influences of that kind, and the abductions could be cross-world travel of some kind. So, we better stop yakking. We'll take our break. Okay, you're listening to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno on WOON 1240 AM, 99.5 FM in New England's beautiful Blackstone River Valley. We'll be right back on Behind the Paranormal, so stick with us.
From the events calendar at WoonsocketRadio.com, Purple Up at Foolproof Brewing, Sunday, April 23rd from noon to 6. The American Legion Post 85 will be hosting an event not on their property, but down in Pawtucket at Foolproof Brewing. That's at 241 Grotto Avenue in Pawtucket. Well, this will help raise money for the Purple Up campaign to help military kids, food trucks, cornhole raffles, and, of course, craft beer will be there as well, and the Boston Bruins jersey. Go down and see them at Foolproof Brewing, 241 Grotto Avenue in Pawtucket, Sunday from noon to 6.
And welcome back to Behind the Paranormal on WOON AM and FM. I'm Paul Eno, and Ben is here with me. We're doing open lines today. If you'd like to call us, it's 401-766-1240, or email Paul at behindtheparanormal.com. So, Ben, I don't know if you want to respond to Peter's question on abductions?
I mean, I think you pretty much covered it. We're still hearing more, but I think a lot of it isn't as publicized. There's a lot more studies going on from a lot of different groups that are kind of doing more like, I don't want to say focus group's not the right word, but there's a lot more studies going on, like Kathleen Martin's whole organization, like basically kind of tracking and cataloging and
The Starborn group.
the Starborn group.
Support groups.
Right. So there's more of that going on. So it's less like Betty and Barney Hill type stuff and more like, it seems like it's a lot more intimate, if that's the right word to use. because it's such a personal experience, and it's like, you know, it can be either really good or really bad depending depending on who you talk to. And I think the really important thing is it's not as we still hear about it, but I think the problem is not the problem, but I think the difference is how it's approached by the community now.
Yeah.
Rather than, okay, let's publicize it. It's like, all right, well, you know, these people endured something that's traumatic in some way, shape, or form, even if something good happened. It's like, you know, the way that it's approached is different, it seems.
It reminds me of that case we, against our better judgment, went with a group to a house in Massachusetts because they were having quote-unquote ghost problems, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they were all excited about, they got this picture or they got that, and the poor homeowner's sitting there and nobody's paying attention to her except us. We believe in a people-centered approach rather than a phenomena-centered approach. In the same way, I think many people who went through the abduction experience, or whatever that may have been, felt neglected by the mainstream researchers who were just interested in the phenomena. Did anybody else see the craft or whatever it was, all that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you're absolutely right. There's more of a personal approach now.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the big thing, is just how the approach has been sort of shifting, especially in that realm.
Yeah.
Where you know, now there's more. That's why I always really like the whole support group idea, because it is really tough, you know.
Yeah.
It's like that's a, you know, probably a mind-wrenching experience, you know, to say the least.
Well,
So-
that's it.
So I think that's really important. But I guess going along with your sort of thread of talking, I'm going to take Phil from Georgia's
Sure.
question / point here, which is the emergence of artificial intelligence is raising grave concerns for our future. However, it is possible that is it possible that modern humans are actually AI? If our DNA has been altered by unknown entities, we might be. Human evolution took that giant unexplained leap with the Sumerians.
Well, that's true. Also, nobody pays much attention to this, but at the same time the Sumerians were taking that giant leap, there was a lot of movement in that direction in China as well. So it was a little bit before that, but around the same time.
Well, I guess it's kind of whatever your definition of artificial intelligence is.
That's true. Yeah.
That's because it's. I mean, I don't really much agree, because this is kind of journeying back over into Ancient Aliens territory, which I kind of am in the same boat as you, where I feel like it doesn't really give humans a lot of credit.
No.
And it's like it's just kind of like, well, we couldn't do it. We were a bunch of dummies with hammers, and it's kind of like the opposite side of the spectrum.
People are pretty smart.
Right.
Or they wouldn't have survived.
Right. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. And but the theme that we see in a lot of ancient mythologies is that humans were sort of given tools in a sense, things they just like weren't ready for, because we're cunning little critters. And, you give us the right stuff and we can, pretty much make anything, It's
Yeah.
like yesterday, right? This is a little personal example. I was told by my lovely wife, please install this new light in our dining room. And I said, okay. So I take down the old light and I go to put up the new one. The plate that I'm supposed to be, screwing to the receptacle is too small. So I rack my brain and I go through all of the miscellaneous junk that I have, and I manage to kind of rig up, a nut and a bolt, and I screw it together, and then good as new. And I kind of rigged it together. Definitely wasn't meant to fit, but you know what? It worked. And so I didn't need aliens to teach me how to do that. I figured it out because I used the tools that I had, and I made a solution work. So the big theme that we see in ancient mythologies, right? So your Prometheus, your Enochs, your whoever, right? They'll come down and they'll say, all right, humans, here's something cool for you to use, and then they inevitably get punished by the other gods. But then the humans have this like technology, and it's like, oh, what are we going to do with this? We're
Yeah.
given sort of a raw material, right? And then it's like, well, we can do this with it. We can make weapons out of it. We can build buildings. We can do all this stuff. And it's like, that's kind of the big thing. You have stuff that pops up like, oh, they're messing with DNA and all that. But the big thing isn't so much the DNA. I think we're kind of, losing the forest in the trees. The big thing is we're missing the fact that it's like what's given to us is technology. And it's like, and it's stuff that, the continual theme is we're not ready for it. And it's like, so we do all sorts of things with it, right? So like, we'll take Prometheus as an example, because he brings down fire, he gives fire to people, and then the gods
Greek
are
mythology. Yeah.
right, yeah, and so then et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But then you get more into detail if anybody's ever read One Enoch, which is very fascinating, by the way.
Yeah.
Because
Obviously a relative of ours.
exactly.
I
But
get jokes about that all the time.
but he kind of comments on other mythologies that are going on at the same time, right? The Sumerians, anybody in Mesopotamia, really, where you have the gods, lowercase g, coming down and saying, all right, here's the art of metallurgy, right? And so it's like, so they kind of just say, here's how you do it, and then they kind of just leave it and walk away. And it's like,
Yeah.
so it's like, what do you do with it? Well, I guess, I don't really like my neighbor so much. I'll make a bronze sword and I'll go and hack him to pieces. And so, or, I remember makeup was another one of them, was one of the ones Enoch complained about. And, or like, music or anything like that. And it's like all these things that, on the surface seem very good, but but they can be used in different ways. It's very ambiguous. And we don't like ambiguity. We like things to kind of like be good or bad. And it's like, well, I'll make the argument that I'm not really a huge fan of technology. People are like, well, it does so many things. It heals people. It does all this. And it's like, yes, but it also makes nuclear bombs.
Yeah.
And so I think the thing that we need to keep in mind is that, sure, you have all this stuff that we can really get lost in the weeds with, Ancient Alien style with, well, someone came down and messed with our DNA, which is entirely possible. I don't.
Well, you have 223 genes that shouldn't be there
No, I don't.
in the human genome.
No, I don't disagree with that. And I know the facts. The facts are there, but the thing that is also important is there's a lot of other factors too that we could just not even be taking into account. Whether it's the cosmic dust cloud theory or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Because it's like, even Skittles, right? Skittles actually have the power to, they're so genetically altered. There have been studies done where it shows that they change human DNA.
You grew up on Skittles.
I did, and it's probably why I have stomach problems, but that's a different point. So the thing is, it's like, we mess ourselves up all the time. And so, I can only imagine, what we're doing to ourselves now.
Well, the whole
But-
AI I'm sorry, did you finish?
No, well, so this is I'm circling into my point. So the point being is that the whole artificial intelligence thing is really not anything new, in a sense. It's the same theme of us attempting to create something with what we have,
Yeah.
so that it can accomplish a task that we can control utterly. But then it always ends up in a sense where it just completely goes out of control, right? It's the whole point of, it's like, we have all these hierarchies and such and governments and all that so that we can control the world around us, but inevitably it always falls apart. That's
We're
just
a bunch of Dr. Frankensteins.
effectively, yes. So I think really, along with that theme, a lot of the themes in ancient mythology were just us getting technology we're not ready for. And, arguably, I just don't think morally, spiritually, mentally, whatever, we're not really ready for a lot of these things. And so, but we're given these things, and you can even see it in UFO mythology, right? And I call it mythology only because it's like it's sort of a modern mythos, right? The whole idea that tinfoil came from UFOs, right?
Yeah.
Or that
Velcro.
stuff that's being distributed by the higher ups, the unknowns, the mystical people that are in the government, and it's the same thing. It's our modern day Prometheus.
Well, when it comes to AI, yeah, I think you're right. Dr. Jeffrey Kripal, who was on the show a few weeks ago, and will be with us on the panel for our 1000th show in June, was saying that he does not fear AI in the sense that it does not have a soul or animus or whatever you want to call it that people have. And I don't know if I agree with him on that, but there is a component that would be missing. But the component I see missing from AI is conscience. I mean, there are enough people who don't have any conscience anymore. We don't need machines doing that. So I am very concerned about it as well. So, but as far as whether that helped to create us, there's really, I don't know if there's any way to really even know that, except for the genome having these extra genes, which doesn't necessarily mean AI. It means somebody might have messed with us, whether it be aliens or humans from other parallel realities who kind of blundered in them. Who knows?
I mean, the problem is that we program it and it functions within those parameters,
Yeah.
right? So it's like, I always reference Dr. Paula Boddington with her work on the ethics of it, because it is really true. Because the first question that you really need to ask is, if somebody says, well, it's getting conscious, and it's like, well, how do we even know we're conscious?
Yeah.
That's the first question. And the second thing is, well, I mean, it functions within the parameters that you give it. And so with that, it's like, you work. It's only as ethical as the person that creates it.
That's right.
And so, because it's functioning within certain parameters, even if it seems like it's not, right? If it's continually learning, it's like at the end of the day, it's like it's still Skynet was still created by a person and functioned within parameters. And so, at some point, it's like it'll require so much processing power that it just I don't know. It's a whole thing. And I think in the broadest sense of the definition, right? Intelligence that's created artificially. If we want to say that we're artificial intelligence, I don't know. It's like I had a chemistry professor in college who made a really interesting point. He was, because we were talking about synthesizing polymers, right? So like not creating, we can't use the word created, because he made a joke. He was like, yeah, biology is really very religious because we don't create anything, we synthesize it. And so, because you don't really make anything, you just kind of combine stuff, and that's how you get different materials and all that. So like your plastics and things like that, your et cetera. But the really interesting thing that came out of that was that whole statement that we don't create stuff, we synthesize it. And so we're not really creating anything, we're just synthesizing. So in that sense, it's like if it is artificial intelligence, if we are indeed that, it's like the difference is we weren't created that way, it was synthesized.
All right.
I don't know if that makes much of a difference, but it's I don't know.
Well, it would, I think, but we just don't know.
Right, that's kind of the big
All right,
problem,
but,
is we're
thank
not
you,
entirely
Phil.
sure.
For the question. Several people wrote in, I didn't put it in the script, asking, I guess people are going back listening to old shows,
Oh boy.
and we did one in 2011 on the bloodline with a fellow from England who had researched this stuff that later, I guess, became the Dan Brown films, the what were they with Tom Hanks?
The Da Vinci Code.
Da Vinci Code and
Angels and Demons.
Angels, yeah, and the idea being that Jesus and Mary Magdalene were married and everybody had a fit. It's funny, we come from a more Eastern perspective, and they were good films as far as they went, but I'm just flummoxed as to the problem with Jesus having a bloodline. I mean, so what? I said this in the seminary. I would ask, if Jesus is truly God and truly man, as the theology says, why wouldn't he have had children, a family? That's like kind of, something you do. And especially for a young Jewish man in that time and culture not to have done so would have been extremely strange. Peter had they, most of them had families, as far as we know. So I don't see the whole problem. And again, this is in response to questions about this with the whole issue. There's one scene in Da Vinci Code where the mad monk says to the woman who turns out to be a descendant of Christ, every breath you take is an abomination. Something like that. I mean, why? I don't get it, you know? This
I don't know. I could.
fixation on sex.
Well, I could probably take a stab at it, but I don't really want to delve into
No, I'm just
theology or
responding.
apologetics.
Yeah, I'm just responding to a couple of questions that came in. So what's we have? Yeah, we time maybe one more.
Yeah, sure thing. I guess we can. You know what? Let's. I'll give you a choice. I'll give you a quick synopsis, and we'll see which one we want to take. I think I'm not sure which one would make the most sense to kind of end with. One is about cattle mutilations, and the
Oh
other.
yeah, what about that one? I've been hearing a lot about that.
Yeah, sure thing. Okie
Okay.
dokie. So this is from Carrie, from Australia, and Carrie writes, "What's your take on all these cattle mutilations in Texas? Here's what a news story said: a straight, clean cut with apparent precision had been made to remove the hide around the cow's mouth on one side, leaving the meat under the removed hide untouched. The MCSO said the tongue was completely removed from the body with no blood spilled. It was noted there were no signs of struggle, and the grass around the cow was undisturbed. No footprints, no tire tracks were noted in the area. Ranchers also reported no predators or birds would scavenge the remains of the cow, leaving it to decay untouched for several weeks. 5 other cases like this were reported in Madison and Brazos County area."
Well, one thing that struck me, the first thing I looked for was whether this is in the flap area that we have just begun to research in the area of Texas known as the Big Thicket. That's between Houston and the Louisiana border. It really isn't. It's north of that. So, but I mean, the strangest thing about these cases is they're receiving so much press coverage. That's my opinion. They don't particularly stand out as these cases have gone for decades. The surgical removal of the tongue on many of these poor cows is not necessarily common either, but and they are within an area of 2 counties there. So, but the absence of tire tracks or any other evidence of vehicular movement is interesting. Some of the stories we've heard about these cases in general have ranged to the pretty weird, in the sense that there will be a helicopter that is entirely silent, seen by some witness, or there is a glowing UFO disc that sounds like a helicopter, and that, you know, in both cases they disappear rather rapidly. There have been figures seen around the bodies of some of these animals, and I'm not talking about the Texas case recently, but in the history of these things, supposedly, and still no tracks are found later.
Yeah.
Police have arrived, done forensic investigations, and they pretty much get nowhere. We have done shows on this, not for a long time, but in one of them the opinion was expressed, I guess, by me, that at least I heard through the grapevine more than once, that in that area of the country there were a lot of nuclear open-air bomb tests in the 1950s.
I was going to bring that up.
Okay. Well, why don't you finish the thought?
Well, it's because now that we know, thanks to horrible experiences, throughout the last 50, 60, 70 years of nuclear testing, that the half-life of any of the particles floating around, it just settles and stays. So it's entirely possible that the cattle could be consuming grass that may or may not have nuclear chemicals in them. So the opinion was that it's possible that some cattle were selected to test and see if there was any radioactivity going on inside of the cow, and that would then leach into the food and then into humans is kind of the fear. So I mean, I could imagine that only because, right, so great, the only reason that I can imagine the secrecy around it, right, so like the in Ohio, right, with that train exploding,
Yeah.
and all of that, there's, from what I've heard from we're going to say unofficial news sources, there's a lot of stuff that's happening in that part of the world that's very disturbing that nobody's talking about. And so one of the things is how that, I think, like that town is just very unsafe to live in because of all the chemicals and stuff they're leaching into the water, et cetera, et cetera, et
We have a
cetera.
charity on our charity page for that.
Yeah, and it's
East
awful.
Palestine, Ohio.
Yeah, it's really just like it's awful, and I can imagine. And there's I forget there's a whole bunch of stuff going on, and I can imagine that, let's say you're a meat supplier, right? And you're the cattle that you buy, you want to test it and make sure there's nothing in there, but you don't want any coverage of it, so you do your best to kind of keep it as clandestine as possible, because that would be bad for business. I can imagine that would probably be a thing, but again, this is just a theory, right? So like having some sort of mystery around it, would probably be better for you. Blame it on UFOs. Don't.
Yeah.
That's easier than saying, oh well, meat might be contaminated. That's kind of the thing. Is I could imagine that might be bad for business if that's what you're doing. But the other side of the coin is maybe it is aliens testing our cattle and such. And there's been. I for some reason I always think of Gary Larson cartoons. Anytime that kind of comes into
Far
mind.
Side, yeah.
Right, exactly.
Well, the funny thing is that there's tons and tons of government land out there with cattle being grazed on it, and why don't they do it on government land if the government's behind it?
Well, if you're leasing government land, right? They're basically
Yeah, well, that's true. Yeah.
So it's like some cattle rancher is like, all right, here's X amount of dollars for lease,
Yeah.
and that it's you can see where that goes.
Yeah.
So
who knows? But I'm the biggest mystery is why it's getting so much
coverage
press
now,
coverage.
right?
That's interesting. All right,
Shall we?
we shall.
Well, here we are towards the end of the show, and it's our favorite time, which is announcements. So, you can check us out, the Exeter UFO Festival in September. That's Labor Day weekend. For my dad and for my dad, he will be at the Arizona Dowsers Conference in October.
So visit our show website, behindtheparanormal.com. You can find nearly 1,200 hours of our regular shows and special broadcasts since 2008 from CBS Radio, Achieve Radio, and here on WON, 1240 AM and FM.
Now we're only 7 shows away from our 1,000th show.
Yep. Also hear many of these broadcasts on the major podcast platforms and apps, including iTunes, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube.
And you can download our show app. It's free at behindtheparanormal.com. It doesn't do much, but you can also check out on our website. You can browse our books along with those of our guest co-hosts at our show website, behindtheparanormal.com. Behindtheparanormal.com. One more time, behindtheparanormal.com. You can also find out more about the show, our many cases over the years, our public appearances, and how to book us.
And there's no 800 number.
No, 1-800 Behind the Paranormal. It's too many letters.
Our website has a charity page, as I mentioned. It's got links to several good causes we've adopted, including the one for East Palestine, Ohio. It's a GoFundMe page. The Hilldale Cemetery in Haverhill, Mass. USA Cares, Canadian Veterans Advocacy, Helping Haiti's Orphans, that's my favorite, and the Crows and Colitis Foundation of America, and the Sisterhood of Ground Zero. So check that out, please. So what do we have going on for next week, Ben?
Oh boy, it's we have a show coming up next week that's British UFO researcher and author Gary Heseltine will be back to talk with us about some new details on the Rendlesham Forest case of 1980. I feel like I always like having Gary Heseltine on. We haven't. I feel
Gary's
like,
good. He's a retired detective.
yeah, he has a certain way of investigating that is it's very very methodical, very well thought out. I mean, it probably comes from his time and
Yeah.
in being a part of the force, but still, it's good stuff, and I always like having him on. He's very thoughtful,
Yeah.
very well researched.
Well, that being said, you once threatened to disown me if we did another show on the Rendlesham case.
Well, I'm
But
now
this is
much
some
more
new
mellow
stuff.
than I once
Yeah,
was.
okay. You've mellowed with old age.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, it's a big case, and I I think there was a period of time where it was like every other week we did a Rendlesham Forest show, and I think at that point I was a little fatigued by it.
Yeah.
So you can forgive me.
Well, what happened to you there, you shouldn't forget that.
No, not at all.
Anyway, we leave you today with a thought from American Olympic athlete Simone Biles, whom I believe just got married. I'd rather regret the risks that didn't work out than the chances I didn't take at all. I'm Paul Eno.
And I'm Ben Eno, and thanks for joining us on our great cosmic journey, and we shall see you next time on...
Return to this radio frequency 167 hours from now for another edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. Broadcasting live and local daily